In 16th century France, a woman was pregnant for 28 years. No birth ever came, and no one understood why. Until after her death. Inside her body, doctors found a child made of stone. That one is real, documented, and it's only the beginning. For most of history, nobody could see what happened inside a pregnancy. So when birth did something unusual, people invented their own explanations. Sailors bought pieces of a newborn's membrane as protection from drowning. Twins looked less like a coincidence and more like a message from the universe. And royal babies were delivered in front of a crowd of witnesses just to prove nobody had swapped them. Some of those explanations were funny. One of them turned a mother's tragedy into an accusation. This is part 2 of the most bizarre beliefs humans had about pregnancy. You don't need part 1 to follow along, but by the end, one idea from that video will come back with a much darker face. Let's begin with the luckiest baby a sailor ever met. The baby born with an anti-drowning device. For centuries, some sailors believed protection from drowning could come from a baby. Specifically, a rare piece of membrane from a baby's birth. Occasionally, a baby is born with part of the amniotic membrane still covering the head or face. This is called being born with a caul. Today, it's just an unusual birth event. In European folklore, this baby had arrived wearing plot armor. A child born with a caul might be considered lucky, special, destined for an unusual life. In some traditions, even capable of extraordinary perception. And the caul itself could be preserved, which is where the story takes a very specific turn. Before birth, a baby had spent months surrounded by fluid, protected, alive. And sometimes it entered the world still wearing a piece of the membrane that had surrounded it. We don't know exactly how the superstition began, but one suggested explanation is that people connected those two things. A baby protected in a world of fluid, and a membrane believed to carry that protection with it. And once that connection was made, there was one group of people who suddenly became very interested. Sailors. For centuries, drowning was one of a sailor's greatest fears, and a caul became one of the protections against it. Not metaphorically, people actually bought them. You can imagine the conversation. You're about to spend 6 months crossing an ocean in a wooden box. Yes? Can you swim? No. Would you like to purchase part of a baby? Explain? The belief was that the protection could travel with the membrane. The baby had survived surrounded by fluid. Now the sailor carried the thing believed to have protected it. The logic wasn't scientific, but it was logic. When death feels random, people look for something they can carry that makes it feel slightly less random. For some sailors, that something had once covered a newborn baby. And again, notice what's happening. Something unusual occurs during birth. Humans refuse to let it remain merely unusual. We assign it a story. This baby isn't simply rare. This baby is protected, lucky, chosen, connected to something. Which raises a question. What if the unusual thing wasn't something covering the baby? What if the unusual thing was another baby? Because throughout history, twins have repeatedly forced humans to answer one question. Is this a biological coincidence? Or is somebody trying to tell us something? When two babies looked like a message. Imagine a world where almost every pregnancy produces one child. Then, one day, 2 babies. Same mother, same pregnancy. Often strikingly similar faces. Without modern embryology, that does not look ordinary. That looks like the universe has underlined something. Different cultures responded in dramatically different ways. In some societies, twins meant blessing, power, or spiritual importance. In others, an unusual birth caused anxiety and suspicion. Among the Yoruba of West Africa, twins could be seen as spiritually powerful. They might bring prosperity and protection to a family. But that power also meant they had to be treated with care. And if one twin died, the relationship was not necessarily considered finished. In some Yoruba traditions, a carver could create a small wooden figure called an ere ibeji. The figure represented the twin who had died, but it wasn't simply placed on a shelf. It was washed, dressed, oiled, carried, and cared for. The child was gone, but the relationship with the twin was not. And the wooden figure allowed that relationship to continue. In ancient Greek mythology, twins raised a very different scenario. What if they didn't have the same father? Heracles and his twin brother Iphicles shared a mother, but according to the myth, they did not share a father. Iphicles was the son of the mortal Amphitryon. Heracles was the son of Zeus. In mythology, twins were shown as extraordinary. But outside mythology, the idea of two fathers carried a much less flattering implication. Because if one pregnancy could somehow involve two fathers, then twins could also become tangled with questions of paternity and a mother's faithfulness. In one culture, twins could be spiritually powerful enough that a relationship continued even after death. In another, stories of twins could blur the line between divine intervention and a very awkward family question. Same biological event, completely different meaning. Because humans don't just experience rare things, we interpret them. And the surprising detail is that our fascination has barely disappeared. Even today, perfectly ordinary twins still get asked, "Can you read each other's minds?" Imagine being asked that for 30 years. Eventually you should just say yes. But if twins created a problem for ordinary families, royal families had an even bigger issue. A royal baby could inherit a kingdom, which meant everyone needed to know one thing for certain. That baby really did come from that queen. And the historical solution was simple. Fill the delivery room with witnesses.
The worst possible audience. There are moments in life when you want privacy. Giving birth is usually high on the list, unless you're royal. Then apparently the solution is to invite the government? For European dynasties, a royal baby was not merely a new family member. It was a political event with tiny fingers. The child might inherit the kingdom, armies, colonies, the throne. The baby could be the ruin or the prosperity of the kingdom. So royal births would take place in front of witnesses, ministers, officials, and other witnesses. People whose presence helped prove that no one had secretly swapped the child. Because apparently, even in a palace, somebody was always imagining a baby heist. One famous example came in France in 1661. Queen Maria Theresa was giving birth to the son of Louis XIV. The future of the Bourbon dynasty was being born, and the room became crowded. Very crowded. Accounts describe an intensely hot, packed environment. Doors and windows were opened. People pressed in. The queen reportedly struggled with the conditions. Just imagine it. You're in labor. Your husband is the Sun King. The future of France may depend on the next few minutes. And the room is filled with 50 people watching you give birth. The baby survived. He became known as the Grand Dauphin. But the birth reveals one of the great ironies of royalty. The more important your body was politically, the less it belonged privately to you. And it wasn't totally unwarranted. The fear of baby swapping was not imaginary in the sense that people really did spread such rumors. In 1688, James Francis Edward Stuart was born in England. Opponents later claimed the baby had been secretly exchanged from the room in a warming pan. The story was false, but it became famous. A royal birth certificate was apparently 40 people saw it, so please stop asking about the pan. But there was one thing all those witnesses could do absolutely nothing about. The pain. Then in the 19th century, chemistry offered a way to reduce it, and some people were not happy. Because childbirth pain wasn't just medical, it had become theological. The queen who made pain relief fashionable. In 1853, Queen Victoria gave birth to her 8th child, and while doing so, she inhaled chloroform. The man administering it was John Snow. Not this John Snow. This John Snow. The doctor later became famous for investigating cholera in London and linking an outbreak to contaminated water.
Some people struggle to have one historically important achievement. Jon Snow apparently looked at his schedule and said, Tuesday, let's revolutionize childbirth. Thursday, how about I invent epidemiology today? By the mid-19th century, anesthesia was changing surgery, but childbirth was more complicated. There were medical concerns about safety, debates about whether ordinary labor justified anesthesia, and some religious objections were reported because of the traditional association between childbirth and pain in the book of Genesis. Basically, the argument was that labor pain had been divinely ordained, so perhaps humans should not remove it. Then the queen essentially said, "Some chloroform, please."
Victoria used it during the birth of Prince Leopold in 1853. She approved of the experience, and she used chloroform again during the birth of Princess Beatrice in 1857. Her endorsement helped make obstetric anesthesia more respectable. Now, history often tells this story too neatly. Religion opposed anesthesia, Victoria used it, everyone changed their minds. Done. Real history was messier. Medical concerns continued. The degree of organized religious opposition is debated, but Victoria's influence was real. When the Queen uses a medical treatment, it stops looking quite so experimental. The influence was so big, the technique became associated with the phrase chloroform a la reine, which means chloroform in the manner of the Queen. Possibly the most Victorian phrase ever created. Even unconsciousness needed branding. By this point, medicine had come a long way. Doctors had microscopes, anesthesia, growing knowledge of anatomy. But pregnancy could still produce cases so bizarre that they sounded supernatural. In 16th century France, a woman became pregnant. The months passed. Seasons passed. Then the years. The woman who was pregnant for decades. In 16th century France, a woman appeared to carry a pregnancy for roughly 28 years. Her name was Colombe Chatry. The famous account was recorded in the town of Sens, France, and the year was 1582. Decades earlier, Chatry had become pregnant, but the expected birth never happened. Her abdomen remained enlarged. She survived, and life continued. 1 year. 5 years. 10 years. At some point, you would assume everyone had run out of explanations. Then, after her death, her body was examined. Inside was a calcified fetus, a stone baby. The medical term is lithopedion, from Greek words meaning essentially stone child. And unlike the wandering womb or tiny sperm person, this is real. Extremely rare, but real. A lithopedion can occur when a pregnancy develops outside the uterus. The fetus cannot be reabsorbed, and the body deposits calcium around it. The calcification can isolate the tissue, and in extraordinary cases, it can remain in the body for years, sometimes decades. Think about how this would look before modern medicine. A woman becomes pregnant. The baby never arrives. She survives. Years pass. Then, after her death, people discover what appears to be a child turned to stone. That is not a medical case. That is a myth writing itself. The famous details of very old cases like Chatry's need careful verification because accounts can be repeated and embellished over centuries. But lithopedion itself is documented, which creates a problem for anyone who thinks people in the past were foolish for considering strange claims, because nature genuinely does strange things. A newborn can emerge covered in membrane. Microscopes reveal creatures nobody knew existed. A baby remaining calcified inside a woman for decades sounds like folklore, but it can happen. And that leaves us with one uncomfortable question. What happens when people encounter a pregnancy just as unusual, but medicine didn't yet have the answer? Sometimes they invented one. And sometimes the person who paid for that answer was the mother. When birth became an accusation.
For most of this series, the strange beliefs about pregnancy and birth have been easy to laugh at. A womb with travel plans, tiny people inside sperm, sailors buying pieces of a newborn's membrane. But not understanding pregnancy had a darker side. Because when something went wrong, people wanted an explanation. In early modern Europe, a baby born with severe physical abnormalities might not be seen simply as the result of a medical condition. The birth could be treated as a warning, a punishment, a message from God. And sometimes, people went looking for someone to blame. In 1637, Mary Dyer, a resident of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, was caught up in one of the colony's fiercest religious conflicts. She was close to Anne Hutchinson, a woman who had challenged powerful religious authorities. During this time, she was pregnant and finally gave birth. But unfortunately, her baby was stillborn and had severe physical abnormalities. And when the details of Mary's pregnancy became known, her enemies connected the two. The baby's condition was not treated as an unexplained medical tragedy. Instead, it was treated as evidence. Evidence that Mary and the people around her were wrong, that their beliefs were dangerous, that God himself had taken a side. Think about how extraordinary that is. A woman experiences a medical event no one could explain, and so the explanation becomes, her ideas did this. And suddenly, a belief we explored in part 1 looks a little different. Maternal impression. The idea that what a pregnant mother saw, thought, or feared could physically reshape her unborn child. It wasn't only a strange belief about cravings and birthmarks. If a mother's thoughts could supposedly shape her unborn child, then anything unusual about the child could become her fault. That was the dangerous side of the mystery. When people couldn't see what was happening inside pregnancy, imagination filled the gap. Sometimes with wandering wombs, sometimes with tiny humans, sometimes with lucky charms, and sometimes with blame. For thousands of years, birth was one of nature's greatest black box. Everyone could see what went in. Everyone could see what eventually came out. But everything in between was hidden. So we filled that darkness with gods, magic, fear, and some genuinely remarkable guesses. And perhaps that's the strangest thing about all these stories. They aren't really stories about how foolish people used to be. They're stories about what humans do when the answer matters desperately, and we simply cannot see it yet. Humans always filled that darkness with whatever explanations made the mystery feel understandable. But birth is only half the question. Because if you think we had strange ideas about how a person enters the world, wait until you hear where we thought humans came from in the first place.